The rain fell gently that morning, leaving a trail of glistening droplets on the city's concrete sidewalks. John sat on a park bench with Lily by his side. He adjusted the worn coat on his daughter's shoulders, trying to shield her from the cold wind that cut like blades. Her little pink backpack, filled with tattered notebooks, rested beside them, ready for another day of school. John glanced at the sky, as if searching for answers among the grey clouds. Lily, her golden hair tied in a ponytail, had an innocence in her eyes that defied the harsh reality around her. "Daddy, today's PE day. Do you think I can win the race?" she asked with a smile. John smiled back despite the weight in his chest. "Of course, you're the fastest of them all," he replied, trying to hide the pain in his voice. He knew Lily was aware of their situation, but he did everything he could to keep the magic of her childhood alive. As Lily entered the school, John lingered by the gate for a moment, watching her disappear down the hallway. A mix of pride and despair consumed him. There was no money for her lunch, nor any certainty about where they'd sleep that night. But he still had to find a way to protect her. In the afternoon, he walked to Mark's small restaurant. The smell of homemade food wafted onto the street, stirring the appetite of passers-by. John hesitated as he opened the door, aware that Mark's generosity had its limits. "John, take a seat. I made some hot soup today," Mark said, drying his hands on a flour-stained apron. He was a burly man with tired eyes but a heart full of kindness. "Thank you, Mark." I don't know how to thank you for all this," John said, taking the steaming bowl Mark placed in front of him. "No need to thank me. We all need a helping hand sometimes," Mark replied with a faint smile. But there was something different in his tone that afternoon. He seemed more worried than usual. Sensing his friend's tension, John couldn't help but ask, "Is everything okay? You seem tense." Mark sighed deeply and sat across from John. "The truth is, things aren't good. The restaurant is on the brink of closing. Bills are piling up, and if I don't come up with some money fast, I'll have to sell." John fell silent for a moment, absorbing the news. Mark's restaurant was more than a place to eat. It was the only support he and Lily had. The thought of losing it was terrifying. "Is there anything I can do to help?" John finally asked, knowing he had little to offer. Mark looked at him skeptically. "You've already got so much on your plate, John. How could you help me?" John met his friend's gaze, a spark of determination lighting up in his chest. "I used to be in advertising, remember? I know how to attract customers. Maybe we can come up with something together to save the restaurant." Mark shook his head slowly, considering the idea. "We don't have much time. A week tops before I have to make a decision." "Then a week is all we need," John said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. He knew it was a risky bet, but he couldn't just stand by while the only stable point left in his life fell apart. As night fell, John returned to the park bench where he and Lily usually slept. While Lily snuggled into his coat for warmth, John gazed at the stars, searching for inspiration. He knew the challenge ahead was enormous, but he couldn't afford to fail, not for Mark and certainly not for Lily. The next morning, John woke before Lily. He stood still for a moment, watching his daughter sleep. Despite everything, she still had that glow on her face, a kind of unshakable faith in life that he feared he couldn't sustain much longer. It was what drove him. He gently brushed her hair, picked up her pink backpack and prepared for another day of struggle. After dropping Lily off at school, he returned to Mark's restaurant with an old notebook he'd found in the trash days earlier. Now, it was his main tool. He sat at one of the tables and began jotting down ideas frantically, scribbling strategies that blended memories of past campaigns with improvised plans for the restaurant. Mark watched from a distance, still skeptical. "You look inspired over there. Got any magic in that notebook?" he asked, approaching. John looked up and smiled faintly. "It's not magic, but it's the best I've got. How about we run a promotion to engage the community? Something like an interactive game. People come in, try something from the menu, and if they guess the ingredients, they get a discount or even a free meal." Mark crossed his arms, pondering. "It doesn't sound like a bad idea, but it'll cost money, and that's something we don't have." "You're already giving away free meals to people like me, Mark. Think of it as an investment. Plus, I can help organize everything." "It won't be perfect, but we can make it work," John said, trying to sound confident. Reluctantly, Mark gave in. "All right, let's try it." The following hours were spent cleaning tables, adjusting menus, and even helping in the kitchen to better understand the dishes that could be used in the game. Mark's daughter, Sarah, watched from a distance, always keeping to herself. She was shy, and her interactions with John were brief and formal. Yet there was something about her that caught his attention, something he couldn't quite define. The third day started with more activity at the restaurant. The guessing game promotion was drawing in a greater flow of customers, but it was still not enough to secure the business's survival. John felt the pressure mounting by the hour, and Mark seemed even more tense despite the small progress they had made. While helping out in the kitchen, John couldn't get Sarah's music out of his head. He knew it was something special, but convincing her seemed like an almost impossible task. Still, he decided to try again. During the break between lunch shifts, he found Sarah sitting at one of the corner tables, scribbling something in a notebook. She seemed so focused that she didn't notice John approaching. "Writing something?" he asked, trying to sound casual. Sarah jumped slightly and quickly closed the notebook. "Nothing important." John smiled. "I'm not great at hiding things, so I'll be direct. I think your music could change everything here." She sighed, crossing her arms. "I already told you I don't like playing in front of people." "Why not? You're amazing. Your music can move people, connect them, transform them. It's not about being perfect or grand. It's about what it makes people feel," John said sincerely. She remained silent for a moment, staring at the closed notebook in her hands. Finally, she murmured, "Playing has always been just for me. I don't know if I'm ready to share that." John realized it wouldn't help to push her, so he changed his approach. "How about a trade? You play one song for me, just for me, and I'll help you with anything you need. Deal?" For the first time, Sarah let out a small laugh, shaking her head. "You're persistent, aren't you? Fine, but just one song." John sat across from her, eager, as Sarah picked up the guitar. She started playing a soft melody, and when her voice filled the quiet space of the restaurant, John felt a chill run down his spine. The music was raw, honest, full of emotion. It was something he knew could make a difference. When she finished, Sarah looked at him nervously. "So?" John smiled, his eyes bright. "It's even better than I expected." Sarah lowered her head, blushing slightly. "I don't know. Maybe I could play just once, but if it doesn't work, you promise not to ask me again." "Deal," John replied, trying to contain his excitement. That night, John and Mark prepared for Sarah to perform a small discreet set. There were no announcements or major preparations. It was just a test. Mark, though skeptical, seemed hopeful. Lily, who was thrilled about the idea, helped arrange the chairs, mumbling to herself as if she were rehearsing something. The first customers arrived, and the guessing game began as usual. The turnout was decent, but still not enough to fill the place. As night fell, Sarah appeared with the guitar in her hands. She looked hesitant, as if she wanted to run away, but John's encouraging look and Lily's smile kept her rooted in place. I'm going to play a song. I hope you like it," she said, almost inaudibly before beginning. The first notes echoed through the small space, and the chatter stopped. People started paying attention, mesmerized by the melody and the sweetness of Sarah's voice. When she finished, there was a moment of silence before the restaurant erupted in applause. Sarah, clearly emotional, looked at John and Mark, who were grinning from ear to ear. Lily ran up to her and hugged her legs. "You're amazing. I knew it would work." From that moment on, something changed in the restaurant. It wasn't just a place to eat. It became a place to feel. People started talking about Sarah's performance, and the next day the crowd grew larger. John knew there was still a lot of work to do, but for the first time in months, he felt they were on the right track. That night, as they closed the restaurant, Sarah approached John. "Thanks for insisting. I guess you were right." John smiled, but there was something else in his eyes, something he couldn't quite explain. "It wasn't insistence. It was believing in what I heard, and in what you can do." As she walked away, John felt that it wasn't just the restaurant being saved. There was something bigger growing there, something he didn't fully understand, but knew was worth protecting. The following days brought a visible change to the restaurant. Sarah began performing regularly, always with the same initial shyness, but her music had already won over the local community. Word of mouth spread stories about the young singer and the welcoming atmosphere of Mark's restaurant. Gradually, the once empty and somber place transformed into a vibrant meeting spot. John, on his part, started seeing tangible results from their collective effort. He reorganized the space to highlight the performances, moving tables, and installing simple but effective lights that created a cozy, artistic vibe. The advertising ideas he had scribbled in his notebook began taking shape. Posters placed around the neighborhood and improvised but effective social media posts created with the help of a loyal customer. Despite the progress, Mark still carried a worried expression. At the end of a long night after the last customers had left, he approached John as they cleaned the tables. "You know we're not out of the woods yet, right?" Mark said with a sigh. John stopped what he was doing and looked at him. "Yeah, I know, but we're on the right track. People are coming in. They're talking about the restaurant. This is just the beginning." Mark shook his head. "The debts are bigger than you think. Even with the increased traffic, the final deadline is approaching. The bank won't wait." John felt a chill in his stomach. He knew they were racing against time but hadn't realized just how dire the situation was. "How much time do we have?" 3 weeks, maybe less," Mark replied, staring at the floor. John ran a hand through his hair, trying to stay calm. "Then we need to think of something bigger, something that will bring in more people all at once." As the two spoke, Sarah approached with Lily by her side. The little girl was holding a colorful piece of paper she had drawn during the day. "I have an idea," Lily said excitedly. Mark smiled, tired but curious. "What is it?" "Why don't we throw a party? Like a special night with music, different food, and pretty decorations. Everyone will want to come." John and Sarah exchanged glances. The simplicity of Lily's idea was disarming, but there was something to it. John knelt beside her, examining the drawing. "A party. This could be more than just an idea, Lily. It could be the solution." Sarah seemed intrigued. "A special night. We could make it a charity event, something that involves the community. Local musicians could join and we could ask for donations to help with the debts." Mark, although still hesitant, began to see potential in the idea. "It's risky, but it might work. People love feeling like they're part of something bigger." John smiled, feeling a fresh wave of determination. "Let's do it. Let's organize the biggest night this restaurant has ever seen, and let's give it a name. Something like Night of Hope." Over the next few days, the small group poured their energy into planning the event. John took charge of spreading the word, using every resource he could find. Sarah reached out to local musicians, pushing past her shyness to convince some to participate. Lily helped with the decorations, painting posters with optimistic messages. Even Mark, initially reluctant, began to get more involved, preparing a special menu for the occasion. When the night of the event finally arrived, the restaurant was unrecognizable. Lights hung from the ceiling, creating a magical atmosphere. The tables were decorated with candles and simple yet charming flowers. At the entrance, a chalkboard read, "Welcome to the Night of Hope." People started trickling in, and soon the place was packed. Local musicians took turns on the small makeshift stage, filling the space with life and energy. Sarah, however, was visibly nervous. It was her first time performing in front of so many people. John found her in the back of the restaurant, sitting with her guitar on her lap. "Are you ready?" he asked gently. "I don't know if I can do this," Sarah said, staring at the floor. John knelt beside her, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Look out there. All these people are here because they believe in what we're doing. You are the heart of this, Sarah. Trust yourself. Trust what your music can do." She took a deep breath and nodded. "All right, I'll try." When Sarah stepped onto the stage, the chatter in the restaurant died down. She hesitated for a moment, her eyes scanning the crowd, but then she began to play. The first note from her guitar was enough to silence even the quietest whispers. Her voice, sweet and powerful, filled the room and all eyes were fixed on her. As she sang, something magical happened. People started singing along, carried by the melody and the raw emotion in Sarah's voice. It was more than just a performance. It was a moment of connection. When she finished, the restaurant erupted into applause and cheers. John, watching closely, felt his eyes well up. It wasn't just the music, it was what it represented. A chance, a spark of hope amidst the chaos. At the end of the night, Mark counted the donations and the money raised. While it wasn't enough to solve everything, it was a significant amount, enough to negotiate more time with the bank. More importantly, the event had united the community around the restaurant, creating a sense of belonging that had never existed before. As they closed the restaurant, Sarah approached John. "I guess you were right. It wasn't just my music. It was all of this together." John smiled. "We still have a lot of work ahead, but tonight we proved it's possible." As the two exchanged a look, Lily ran up to them, grabbing both their hands. "I knew it would work, and I think Sarah should sing forever." They laughed, but in that moment, John felt something deeper. It wasn't just the restaurant being saved, they were saving each other. The morning after the night of hope, the restaurant still seemed to breathe the echoes of the previous evening. The glimmer in Mark's eyes was visible. For the first time in months, he seemed to believe there was a way out. Sarah, though exhausted, was more relaxed. Even after her performance, she continued to receive messages from new customers, praising her music and promising to return. The event's impact had been greater than anyone could have imagined. John arrived early with Lily, as he'd been doing since he started working with Mark. He felt like he'd become a sort of right-hand man at the restaurant. But more than that, he was beginning to feel that he was building something more solid than he'd had in years. "You worked magic last night," Mark said as he prepared coffee. "I still don't know how I'm going to thank you for that." John smiled as he arranged some tables. "We're not done yet, Mark. The restaurant is gaining momentum, but we need consistency. People have to want to come back, not just for one special night." Mark nodded, but there was something in his expression that made it clear the debt still loomed over him like a shadow. The success of the event had given them temporary relief, but he knew they had to keep up the pace. That afternoon, as John worked on a new promotional campaign, Sarah approached with a tray of freshly washed dishes. She hesitated before speaking, as she always did when something seemed to weigh on her mind. "John, can I ask you something?" she said finally. "Of course," he replied, not looking up from the papers in front of him. "Why are you doing this? Why do you care so much about the restaurant, about us?" John stopped what he was doing and looked at her. For a moment he thought about how to answer, but he decided to be honest. "Because I know what it's like to lose everything. I know what it's like to have no one to help you when you need it most. And because even when I had nothing, you all extended a hand. That is priceless." Sarah was silent, absorbing his words. There was something about John's sincerity that disarmed her, but it also made her feel something she had been trying to ignore. Before she could respond, Lily came running over with a mischievous smile. "Daddy, Sarah could be famous, right? She should record her songs." John and Sarah laughed, but Lily's comment planted an idea. Maybe Sarah could, in fact, be the missing piece. Her music had already captivated the local community. Perhaps it could draw an even larger audience. In the following days, John threw himself into his work at the restaurant. He started filming short clips of Sarah's performances and Mark's unique dishes, creating simple but engaging videos to share on social media. The response was surprising. Comments and shares began to pour in, and people from other neighborhoods started visiting the restaurant to check out the singing restaurant and its amazing food. However, challenges persisted. The increased business also brought new expenses, more ingredients, temporary staff to handle the demand, and an urgent need to replace equipment that had worn down due to lack of maintenance. Mark felt the weight of every new decision, and even with visible progress, there were days when he seemed ready to give up. One night, after closing, he called John aside for a private conversation. "I don't know if I can keep doing this, John. It's too much. The debts are crushing me. Even with everything you've done, I feel like I'm fighting a losing battle." John listened quietly, understanding his friend's frustration. He knew that years of struggle wouldn't disappear with one good week of business. "I get it, Mark, but look around. Look at what we've built. People are coming back. They care about this place because you created something that means more than just food. It's a home for so many people, including me and Lily, and I'm not going to let this end without a fight." If you still believe, even just a little, let's keep going." Mark looked shaken, but saw a spark of determination return to his eyes. "If you're with me, then I'm not giving up." In the days that followed, John began working on something bigger, a community festival at the restaurant. Inspired by the Night of Hope, he planned an outdoor event featuring music, food, and activities for kids. Sarah became even more involved, helping with the organization and accepting with less resistance that her music would be the centerpiece. As the preparations advanced, John and Sarah's relationship deepened. Small gestures, a smile, a shared glance, conversations about life, began to reveal a feeling both tried to deny. For Sarah, it was something new and scary. For John, it was a glimpse of something he thought he'd never have again. One night, as they were closing the restaurant, Sarah finally broke the silence. "Have you ever thought about starting over with someone?" John looked at her, surprised, but smiled. "Every day." They remained silent, but what was left unsaid felt stronger than any words. The festival finally took place, drawing even more people to the restaurant. Sarah's music was the highlight, but what truly defined the event was the sense of community. People who had initially been just customers now felt part of something bigger. Donations continued to come in, and Mark managed to renegotiate his debts, buying the time needed to stabilize the business. That night, as everyone celebrated the festival's success, John and Sarah exchanged a look that said more than any conversation. They knew that together they had overcome something immense, and they knew this was only the beginning. The restaurant was busier than ever that week. The community festival had been a turning point, transforming the place into more than just a spot for meals. It became a gathering place for moments of leisure and connection. Sarah now performed more frequently, and though she still carried a hint of shyness, there was a new sparkle in her eyes. She seemed to be rediscovering a part of herself she had kept hidden for a long time. John, for his part, felt more exhausted than ever, but also more alive. Each day was a battle to keep the restaurant running, but he knew he was building something bigger. During breaks, as he organized papers and calculated expenses, he often glanced at Lily running through the restaurant, playing with customers or helping Sarah clear tables. That scene gave him a peace he hadn't felt in years. Mark, though relieved by the restaurant's newfound success, still carried the weight of the debts. One day, while cleaning the kitchen with John, he finally voiced a concern that had been gnawing at him. "Do you think this will last? The crowds, people coming back? Or is it just another wave that'll fade away?" His voice was heavy with uncertainty. John stopped what he was doing and looked at his friend. "I think it's up to us. It's not just the restaurant that's changed, Mark. You've changed. People feel that. They're not coming here just for the food or Sarah's music. They're coming because they feel something special here. But we have to keep evolving." Mark nodded, deep in thought. "And what if it's not enough? What if this all falls apart?" John took a deep breath. He understood Mark's fear because he shared it. "If it falls apart, at least we'll know we did everything we could. But we're not giving up before we've tried." That night, as they closed the restaurant, Sarah approached John. She seemed hesitant, holding something in her hands. I've been thinking about writing a new song to play here, something about what we've been through." John smiled, surprised. "I want to write a song about the restaurant. About the restaurant, the community, about us," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "I don't know if it's a good idea, but I want to try." John's heart raced at the way she said, "us." There was a vulnerability in her words he couldn't ignore. "I think it's an incredible idea, and I know it'll be beautiful, like everything you play." Sarah looked away, but she couldn't hide a faint smile. "I'll work on it." In the days that followed, John noticed Sarah spending more time alone with her guitar and a notebook, scribbling words and chords. He didn't press her, but he knew something special was taking shape. Meanwhile, he continued working tirelessly to keep the restaurant running. The new responsibilities were starting to weigh on him, and at times, he found himself doubting whether he was on the right path. One particularly busy afternoon, as he helped in the kitchen, John heard a familiar sound coming from the dining area. It was Sarah's voice, but there was something different. She was playing a new melody, something he had never heard before. He dropped everything and went to the front, where he found Sarah singing to a small group of customers. The song was gentle but filled with emotion, and every word seemed to speak of resilience, hope, and unity. When she finished, the room erupted in applause. Sarah looked at John, and for a brief moment, it felt like they were the only two people in the room. She stepped off the small makeshift stage and approached him, still holding her guitar. "What did you think?" John smiled, visibly moved. "It's perfect. You're amazing." Sarah blushed, but before she could respond, Lily came running over, grabbing both of their hands. "You two are amazing together. Everybody knows it." John and Sarah laughed, but Lily's comment left an unspoken truth hanging in the air, one they both felt but hadn't yet admitted. In that moment, everything seemed possible. As the restaurant continued to thrive, John and Sarah started spending more time together outside of work. Small gestures, conversations after hours, shared smiles during busy moments, began to forge a deeper connection. It was as if, amidst the chaos, they had found something unique and precious. But not everything was easy. One day, Mark received a call from a creditor demanding immediate payment. Despite the recent success, the old debt still loomed heavily over them. He called John and Sarah together for a meeting. "I don't know what to do. They won't wait any longer. If we can't come up with the money in the next few days, they could take the restaurant." John felt the weight of the news, but refused to let his determination falter. "We'll think of something. We didn't come this far to give up now." Sarah, who had been silent until then, finally spoke. "What if we organize an even bigger event? Something to draw even more people. We can use music, involve the community, and maybe it'll be enough." Mark looked skeptical, but John smiled. "She's right. We can do this. Let's plan another special night, and this time we'll make sure everyone knows about it." The idea of an even bigger benefit event began to take shape, and everyone at the restaurant came together to make it happen. It was a huge risk, but as John often said, there was no option but to try. That night, as Sarah and John worked together on the details of the event, he looked at her and felt something beyond gratitude. It was a sense of belonging, of finally being where he was meant to be. And for the first time in a long time, he believed that, with her by his side, they could face anything. In the days leading up to the big benefit event, the restaurant felt more alive than ever. John and Sarah worked side by side, organizing every detail, while Mark refined the special menu for the evening and Lily eagerly handed out flyers in the neighborhood with the boundless optimism of someone who believed nothing could go wrong. But beneath all the excitement, a quiet tension lingered in the air. Everyone knew how crucial this night would be. On the morning of the event, John woke up with a mix of anxiety and determination. He dropped Lily off at school and walked briskly to the restaurant where Mark was already in the kitchen, deep into preparations. Sarah sat at a table, tuning her guitar and going over her new song. "Today's the day," John said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. Sarah looked at him and gave a faint smile. "Do you think we're ready?" "We don't have a choice. We're ready enough," he replied, feeling encouraged by her presence. As evening approached, the restaurant began to transform. String lights were hung at the entrance, creating a warm and magical atmosphere. The improvised stage was decorated with simple but beautiful flowers, and every table had a candle that added a touch of intimacy to the space. Neighbors started showing up early, helping with last-minute adjustments and contributing donations. By 7 o'clock, the first guests began to arrive. The aroma of Mark's special dishes filled the air, and the soft sound of guitar music from one of the guest performers set the tone for the night. The restaurant quickly became packed, with people squeezing in to find a spot as they awaited the main performances. Sarah, who was set to be the final act, watched everything from the back of the room. She clutched her guitar tightly, the nervousness evident on her face. John walked over and sat beside her. "You're nervous," he said, more as a statement than a question. "I am," she admitted, looking toward the stage. "What if I'm not good enough? What if they don't like it?" John gently placed a hand on her shoulder, his eyes full of sincerity. "You've already won everyone over, Sarah. Your music isn't just good. It's what brought us together, what gave us hope. Don't think about being perfect. Just be yourself." She took a deep breath and nodded. "Thank you." When it was time for Sarah to perform, the entire restaurant fell silent. She stepped onto the stage to applause, and after a moment of hesitation, she began to play. The melody was soft and full of emotion, and her voice carried each word like a story everyone needed to hear. The song spoke of new beginnings, finding strength in adversity, and how human connections could change everything. As she sang, John watched the crowd's reactions. Many were visibly moved, some discreetly wiping away tears. He glanced at Mark, who stood behind the counter with his arms crossed, and saw a smile spread across his friend's face. For the first time, Mark seemed to believe that everything would be okay. When Sarah finished, the room erupted into applause and cheers. She stepped off the stage, her eyes shining, and Lily ran to hug her, followed closely by John. "You were amazing," he said, smiling. "You really were," Mark added, coming over to congratulate her. The night continued with other performances, while Mark and John served special dishes and mingled with the guests. The donations exceeded expectations, and by the end of the night, after everyone had left, the group gathered to count the money. It was enough to cover a significant portion of the debts and, more importantly, negotiate more time with the creditors. As they cleaned up the restaurant, Sarah approached John. Exhaustion was etched on both their faces, but there was something else, a silent connection that didn't need words. "You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself," she said softly. "Because I always saw something in you, something that changed all of this," John replied, stepping closer. For a moment, they stood in silence until Sarah took a step forward and kissed him. It was a timid gesture, but it held so much meaning. When they pulled away, they both smiled, as if that moment confirmed something they had already known. From across the room, Lily called out, "I knew it! I told you two were perfect together." They all laughed, and in that moment, everything felt different. It wasn't just the restaurant that was transforming. They were transforming. They were becoming a family. As they locked up for the night, John looked around at the empty restaurant and then at Sarah, Mark, and Lily. He knew the future was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, he felt ready to face it. Together. In the days following the benefit event, the restaurant seemed to have found a new rhythm. The community continued to support the place, and customers from distant neighborhoods began to show up, drawn by the stories about Sarah's performances and the welcoming atmosphere. Mark, though still dealing with financial pressures, showed signs of relief and even renewed enthusiasm. But the fight was far from over. John was more dedicated than ever. In addition to helping at the restaurant, he continued planning new ways to attract customers and strengthen the business's brand. He spent sleepless nights jotting down ideas, studying how they could expand services or create partnerships with other local businesses. Every step was an attempt to ensure they didn't just survive, but thrived. Despite the success, John and Sarah's relationship faced new challenges. They were closer than ever, but the weight of their responsibilities made it hard to find time for themselves. Sarah, still grappling with her shyness and her new role as the star of the restaurant, often felt overwhelmed. John, on the other hand, bore the weight of trying to be everything for everyone: father, friend, partner, and the restaurant's savior. One night, after an especially hectic day, Sarah called John over as he closed the register. "I need to tell you something," she began nervously. John stopped what he was doing and looked at her. "Of course. What is it?" I don't know if I can keep doing this. It's not that I want to give up, but sometimes it feels like everything depends on me, and I don't know if I'm strong enough for that." John stepped closer, hearing the anguish in her voice. "You're not alone in this, Sarah. We're all in this together. I know it feels heavy right now, but we don't have to carry it all on our own." She sighed, looking down at the floor. "I'm just afraid of letting you down, of letting Mark down, and everyone who believes in me." "You could never let me down," John said firmly. "If there's one thing I've learned, it's that being strong doesn't mean never being afraid. It means continuing despite the fear. And you've been incredible." Sarah smiled, though she still seemed thoughtful. "Thank you. I just needed to hear that." That same night, as John walked home with Lily, he felt the weight of Sarah's words. He understood what she was feeling because he carried his own doubts, but he couldn't afford to falter. Lily depended on him, Mark depended on him, and now Sarah did too. However, fate seemed unwilling to give them a break. A few days later, Mark received an official notice from the bank. Even with the renegotiations, the final deadline was approaching faster than they had expected. The money raised at the event had helped ease the pressure, but they were still far from financial stability. That same day, John gathered everyone at the restaurant to discuss the next steps. He was exhausted, but determined. "We can't let this stop us," he said, looking at each of them. "We've come this far, we can't give up now." Mark nodded in agreement. "You're right, but what else can we do? We don't have much time." It was then that Sarah, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. "What if we did something completely different, something no one would expect?" John looked at her, intrigued. "Like what?" "I'm not sure exactly, but maybe something that involves the whole city. Something to show that this restaurant isn't just ours, but everyone's. Like what we did with the Night of Hope, but bigger." Mark looked skeptical, but John smiled. "I like that. Maybe we could organize a street festival. Close off the street in front of the restaurant, bring in other vendors, musicians, artists. Make it an event that involves the whole community." Sarah nodded, gaining confidence. "And we could use my music to draw more attention. Maybe even record a promotional video." Mark still seemed hesitant, but the excitement in Sarah and John's eyes was contagious. "If you two think this can work, then I'm in." In the days that followed, the group worked tirelessly to organize the festival. John used his advertising experience to create an engaging campaign, while Sarah recorded a video playing her song, inviting everyone to the event. Mark managed to convince other local vendors to join in, turning it into a true collective effort. When the day of the festival arrived, the street in front of the restaurant was packed. There were food stalls, performances by local musicians and dancers, activities for kids, and of course Sarah's performances. The energy was infectious, and people seemed more united than ever. At the end of the day, as John watched the crowd begin to disperse, he felt a hand on his shoulder. It was Sarah. She was smiling, her face glowing under the string lights. "You did it," she said. "We did it," he replied, taking her hand. As the two of them watched Lily running and playing with other children, and Mark smiling as he counted the money raised, John realized that, for the first time in a long time, he felt something close to true happiness. Not because the problems had disappeared, but because he knew that with these people by his side, he could face anything. And so, amidst the chaos, the struggles, and the uncertainties, they found something stronger than adversity: each other. The morning after the street festival dawned with a sense of renewal. The restaurant was filled with positive energy, but also the exhaustion of the intense days they had just lived through. While Mark organized the inventory and Sarah helped Lily draw thank you posters for the customers, John reviewed the fundraising numbers. He knew they had reached an important milestone, but there was still a long way to go. Later that morning, Mark approached John with 2 cups of coffee in hand. He seemed more relaxed, though there was still a trace of weariness in his eyes. "We raised a good amount last night," he said, handing John a cup. "It doesn't solve everything, but it gives us some breathing room." John nodded, holding the coffee with both hands. "That's already more than we had before. And now we have something even more important, the community's support. That's what will keep this place standing." Mark looked around, taking in the space that had transformed so much in recent weeks. "I never thought I'd say this, but you brought something here I didn't even know we needed. Thank you, John." John smiled, but before he could respond, Sarah entered the room. She had her guitar slung over her back and a shy smile on her face. "Sorry to interrupt, but I've been thinking about something." Mark raised an eyebrow while John tilted his head curiously. "What is it?" he asked. "I wrote a new song. It's about all of this. About the restaurant, about how you all helped me find something I didn't even know I had. And I was thinking of recording it. Maybe making a simple music video. Something we could use to promote the restaurant." John and Mark exchanged glances. It was a bold idea, but it made sense. Sarah's music had already become a symbol of the restaurant, something that drew people in. Turning it into a video could take the business to the next level. "I think it's an amazing idea," John said. "We could film something simple right here, showing the day-to-day of the restaurant, the people who come here, and you singing. It'll feel authentic." Mark hesitated for a moment, but eventually agreed. "If you think this could help, I'm in." Over the next few days, the small group began planning the recording. John used his advertising connections to borrow a camera and convinced a friend to help with editing. Sarah practiced her song during breaks at the restaurant, while Lily drew backdrops for the video, insisting her ideas were indispensable. When the day of the shoot arrived, the restaurant was transformed into a small makeshift studio. Sarah, dressed in a simple white dress that matched her aura of authenticity, sat on the small stage with her guitar. Mark and Lily appeared in the background, tending to tables and interacting with customers. The camera captured everyday moments, shared laughter, and the gentle sound of Sarah's music filling the space. The song's lyrics spoke of new beginnings, finding strength in others, and how a place could be more than just walls and tables. It was a celebration of what the restaurant had become, a refuge, a home, a promise of something better. After hours of filming, the footage was edited and shared on the restaurant's social media pages. The impact was immediate. The video began to spread quickly, shared by old and new customers alike, even by people who had never been to the restaurant but were moved by its message. Sarah's music touched something deep within people, transcending financial struggles and speaking directly to their hearts. In the days that followed, the restaurant began to attract even more customers. People came from neighboring areas and even other towns to try the food and hear Sarah sing live. The surge in business was so significant that Mark had to hire 2 new helpers to handle the influx. But not everything was smooth sailing. The newfound popularity brought new challenges. Sarah started to feel the pressure of being the center of attention, something she had always avoided. Mark, meanwhile, struggled to balance the growing demand with the additional expenses. And John, though excited by the success, began to feel the personal cost of bearing so many responsibilities. One night, after closing the restaurant, John found Sarah sitting alone on the small stage, quietly strumming her guitar. He walked over and sat beside her. "Are you okay?" he asked. She sighed, looking down at the guitar strings. "I don't know. Everything that's happening is amazing, but sometimes it feels like it's not me. Like I've created this version of myself that people want to see, but I don't know if I can keep it up." John was silent for a moment before responding. "You don't have to be anything other than who you are, Sarah. People come here because of you, not some idealized version. Your music is special because it's honest. And that's enough." She smiled faintly, plucking a soft melody. "And you? Are you okay?" John chuckled softly, though there was a hint of weariness in his voice. "I'm okay. I mean, it's a lot, but when I look at what we've built, I think it's worth it." Sarah stopped playing and looked at him. "You're amazing, you know that? You never stop believing." John met her gaze, surprised, but before he could respond, Lily ran into the room with a mischievous grin. "Are you two going to sit here all night? Because I'm hungry." They laughed, and the moment of tension dissolved. But something had shifted between them, a stronger connection, something that didn't need words. That night, as they locked up the restaurant, John felt they were entering a new chapter. There were still challenges ahead, but there was also something else. A sense of belonging, of finally building something that would last. And while the road ahead was uncertain, he knew that with Sarah, Mark, and Lily by his side, they could face anything.